Hi, everybody. I'm back again. Well, sort of. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, amazing. Thrilling TV show. Okay. Anyway, hi, everybody. I'm back again, and it's with some more of the for 40 silver ponies. Um, yeah. So I'm going to start reading. For those of you just tuning in, I am currently reading my dad's novels. Normally I edit them while I'm reading them, except for this one is not done and only has 12 chapters, and the 12 chapters are very, like, each chapter is very tiny. So I am reading it, and then that's basically, I'm just reading it for right now because I told everyone I was going to be reading it this month, thinking there was going to be more to it than that. I didn't realize it was like not completed. Lesson learned. I never really know the condition of what I'm reading. Usually, I mean, I read this one, which is why, like, I read ahead because I wasn't sure. I was a little bit worried to begin with because it only had, like, it was very small, and so then I checked, and yeah, in fact, it only has like 12 chapters, and it probably should have about 36 chapters around there. So yeah. Without further ado, though, I'm just gonna jump on into it. And speaking of chapters and jumping in, uh, chapter 7, Analysts. Dramatic coffee drink. Analyst went back to his room, changed his clothes, and stored his sword once more in the closet. He found the loosened brick in the wall, carefully removed it, then reached in to pull out his carefully hoarded savings. He counted them, though he knew by memory just what he had there: 20 silver ponies, plus a few copper coins. He considered taking these to old Lanathan in partial mitigation for his failure, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Lanathan would want the full amount, possibly with interest, and 20 would only leave him owing 20 more, probably still in the master's master's bad graces. Better use it to buy shares in Jakoth's treasure, he muttered. Then he grimaced at his foolishness and began to put it away. He wasn't looking forward to tomorrow. He could probably expect demotion, and very likely he wouldn't be trusted with anything important for a while. And that wasn't going to be any fun at all, with people once under him sneering behind his back and quite possibly giving him orders. He remembered charging into the bandit lair, sword swinging. I've done all that was expected of me and more. And I wasn't supposed to be attacking bandits, only possibly defending against them. And I get treated like this. He was a long time going to sleep that night. The morning was much as he feared. It started with old Dromo, the overseer, giving him a frown instead of greeting him when he arrived. It got worse from there. He was assigned to the warehouse, counting jars and bales. That was not the work of a fully trained scribe, his job. If he were ever assigned to the warehouse, it would be to verify the count of some junior scribe. He didn't bother to argue. He didn't even protest when he was put under the supervision of Relathan, who had less experience than he himself. This is all part of his punishment, and he'd have to bear it. It got worse. He was forced to work through lunch, without even time to snatch a bite. Why, he asked, knowing full well that there was no urgency about this work. Relathan prodded him with the overseer's wand. Because you're told to, that's why. Now get to it. Annalise never heard anyone sneering or laughing at him, but he knew what was what was going on anyhow. More and more often he thought about attacking the bandits, and he had to push that thought down for fear of breaking into anger, which would do no good. He put up with it until the middle of the afternoon when he stopped for a moment to wipe sweat from his forehead. Rolathan prodded him with the wand again. Come on, get to it! He didn't know what happened, but suddenly he snatched the wand from Rolathan, broke it across his knee, and threw it in the overseer's face. He walked out of Lanathan's house and back to his own rooms. He took out his savings, tucked them away inside of his shirt, took out his sword and belted it on. After a moment's thought, he balanced the sword on the other side with his father's dagger. I think I know pretty much the sort of inn I'm looking for now, he muttered to himself. He muttered to himself as he strode out the door. He was fortunate enough to find Jakath in the third place he tried. He was seated across from a swarthy young man from Rahassan by the looks of him. They both looked up as Annalise sat down. You need money to outfit a party, he said. I have some I'd be willing to contribute, on certain conditions. The Rahassanite was looking at him with what seemed to be irritation, and Jakath was giving him one of his expressionless stares. Jakath spoke to his companion. Nallis Tador, this young man with few manners is Annalise, a scribe with whom I had a few doings lately. Annalise, this is Nallis Tador, a mage from Rahassan, Arzawa, to be precise. And when you broke into a private conversation, Annalise, it just so happens we were discussing the outfitting of a party. Now, if you could tell us, quietly enough so that the whole inn doesn't hear you, just how much you'd be comfortable, just how much you could contribute. Annalise felt himself redden, realizing just how much he didn't know about this sort of thing. I have 20 silver ponies, he said, in a quiet voice. The other two looked at each other. Then Jakath turned back to Annalise. That would be almost enough. If we put it in with what I've got, and we can find a couple others who have a bit of money too. Do you understand that you plan to come? Do I understand that you plan to come along? Would there be any other way to protect my investment? He asked, but he was smiling as he spoke. Natalis Tador protested. Jakath, this is no business for scribes. Jakath shook his head. Patience, my magical friend. I assure you, I have seen him use that sword, even given him a lesson or two. He's not a complete beginner. Natalis Tador still frowned, but said grudgingly, If you vouch for him, then. But that still leaves the matter of getting together the rest of the money, Jakath said. With that much for a start, would you say now, Nellis? It does make the matter a little easier, the other said slowly. If we find a few others, with a bit with a bit each to contribute, I'm in. Good, said Jakath, and a light burned in his eyes for a moment. Do you have any prospects in mind? Asked the Rahassanite. Not really. You're the first one I talked to. But you know, if and sore, the only problem is finding people with a little money they're willing to put up. Nallis Chatter nodded. He smiled slightly. I'm a little flattered that I was your first choice. What now? We all go wandering around to see who we can see? That's about it. I'd prefer to approach only people that one or the other of us can endorse. You know what it can be like out on the trail. I do indeed. Where do we go next? The three of them began to walk around, checking out the inns. Annalise had determined he would say as little as possible, at the very least, until he knew a bit more about how these things were done. At the first two inns they entered, peered around through the gloom, Then Jakath and Nalas Tador looked at each other. Do you see anyone? Asked Jakath. No. And they went out again. At the third establishment, Nalas Tador pointed out a large man with light brown skin, sitting alone at a table, staring morosely at a tankard of beer in front of him. Orphaz. You know him? Only to talk to. I've heard a few things about him. He's a good man. Just don't get him talking about the noble families of Shandakar, especially when he's been drinking. Right. They both turned to Endless. Let us deal with this. Don't talk unless someone asks you something. Sorry, don't talk unless someone asks you something, Jakath said. Endless nodded, but he was fuming a little. Did they think he was really so stupid as he'd mess everything up for them? The three of them walked over to the Shandakaranian's table. And he looked up as they approached. He was wearing a shirt of chainmail with a short slung at his side. With a short sword slung at his side. Can you tell that I'm reading this cold? I'm reading this cold. His shield, wooden with a metal rim and metal boss, was leaning against the table to his left, while his spike-metalled helm was on the table to his left-hand side. Was at the table next to his left hand. Good day to you, Orphaz. Good day to you, Jakath. A good day to you, Jakath, isn't it? And also you, Nadas Tador. And you, Analyst. Will you sit down? Thank you. Jakath was still speaking for the group. They sat down, hailed one of the pot boys, ordered beer, then turned to look at Orphaz. He was looking back at them with a canny expression. So, what is it you want of me? I suppose you have a proposition to put to me? Jakath shrugged. We're putting together a party, but we need money for outfitting. We've got most of what we need, so we're looking for people who might have a bit of money to put into the venture. And you come to me because you've heard that I'm wealthy? No, not wealthy, but I don't think you've spent all your money just yet. And besides, there would be another advantage to having a person like you along on a trip like this. The big brown face broke into a brief smile. Ah, such subtle flattery. Tell me, what is this venture you're considering? Jakath shook his head. First off, do you have any money to put into it? Even a few silver ponies? I have a little money, Orphaz said slowly. You tell me what I'm putting into, and I'll tell you whether I'll help finance it or not. Jakath paused, looking at the warrior carefully. All right, I'll tell you. I'm trusting you, mind. If you decide not to come along, at least don't talk to anyone else about it. Of course not. Orphaz sounded a little hurt. Jakath ran through the tale of the supposedly cursed treasure, briefly mentioned that an analyst would have a fair sum of money to put in, and that he and Nalas Tador each had a little, but they needed more. Not to mention needing more men simply to undertake the venture. They were giving first choices to people who had a little money to invest. Orphaz considered the matter. I suppose this is one of those cases where you need my answer right away. We don't want to dawdle around until someone else beats us to the treasure. We can give you a few minutes to think it over, but once we leave here, we won't come back to ask a second time. What you hope for is that I have a little enough money to know it won't last forever, but enough to be able to make a difference for you. Aren't you cutting it a little fine? Jakath shrugged. We'd have to do that no matter who we approached. You seemed like a likely candidate. And as you say, there'd be an advantage in having me along in Shandakar. But I warn you, that's not really my part of the country. I'm from further south in Seguda, near the forest, where they call Barisha Idorad. I'll put in 5 silver ponies. Good. Now we need 2 more or so. If you want to help us look, we've only decided to approach people that one of us can vouch for. The big head nodded. A wise and reasonable precaution. We go immediately then? As soon as we finished our beer. Alice wanted to protest that they should make Orphaz show his money, but he realized that this kind of situation depended on trust. He trusted they trusted him to they trusted him to have the money he promised, and his reputation would suffer if he didn't. An adventurer had to maintain some minimum standard of reputation. Otherwise, he might find himself forced to work alone, with all the hazard that entailed. Good, but I hope you don't have me at an advantage in dealing with Chandrakranian nobility. Of course, there aren't many true nobles up in that country. One of the great kings went through a few years ago to rally people to support him against some pretender, and seems to have granted nobility to anyone with the set with the sense to wipe manure off his boots. But some of those could be worse than nobles. Orphaz, we understand you dislike the Chandrakranian nobility, Jakrath interrupted. But if we stand here waiting for you to explain the whole matter to us, someone is likely to stumble on the treasure by accident. Shall we go? There was a moment when the Chandrakranian's warrior's eyes flashed with anger. Then suddenly he chuckled. You're right, of course, Jakrath. We don't have all day. Let us go. Analysts noticed that his accent thickened considerably for a moment. He was trying to keep a close watch on everything that went on in order to learn from it. But so many things were being done so casually that he wasn't sure what to learn. Did a warrior actually let someone interrupt him with such rudeness? Or was there something between these two that allowed Chakath to do what he had done? He was still wondering as they went out the door. 3 more inns failed to produce any new candidates, but in the fourth, Nihilist Tedor pointed a tall, slender, blond man seated alone at a table with his back to the wall, surveying the whole room with some disdain. There was something about his features, the analyst noted, something in the shape of his eyes and chin. Lafdo Kissen, the Hassanite said. He'll do. Half-elf? Asked Orphaz. Yes. He looked at the Chandrakranian, frowning. Did you ever know a half-elf who did not have a problem with his attitude? Analyst noticed that the accent thickened up again. What kind of problem had Orphaz with the half-elf or half-elves? But he wasn't going to ask any questions. Nihilist Hador turned dark eyes on the big warrior, frowning. I'm vouching for him. I believe we'd agreed to accept that. By the time he'd reached the end of his statement, there was a strong accent over his words as well. For a moment, analysts almost thought he might see a duel between the warrior and a mage, right there at the doorway of the inn. Then Orphaz relaxed. Yes, as you say. Shall we go talk to him? They walked across the room toward the table. The half-elf looked up as they approached. As they neared, Analyst noticed the bow slung over his shoulder. Both his hands had been on the table, but suddenly, so quickly that Analyst hardly saw the move, his right hand was at his belt, probably on a dagger hilt. He smiled, a bare twitch of the lips, and then relaxed slightly. Good day to you, Nellis Tedor, Jakath, and your friends. He glanced down at his right hand, then back up. I hope you'll pardon this, but when one of my sort sees four people approaching him, it's usually trouble. Jakath nodded, smiling. This time we may have good news for you. We're putting together a band, and we have most of the money we need for outfitting. But we need a little more. Would you like to join us? Lofto Kissin gave them a long look. First of all, who is us? You and the Hassanite I know. What of the others? Ah, pardon my bad manners. This is Orphax and Analyst, who is supplying the largest part of the money. And this is Lofto Kissin. So, sit down then and tell me about this venture you propose. No, you, Jakath. I doubt if it's one of those affairs where we wander off into the wilds and see what we can pick up. Jakath smiled. No, indeed. Listen. He proceeded to outline where and what would be doing. Lofto Kissin listened carefully, then jutted out his chin in Analyst's direction. Now, what of him? I've never seen him before, and certainly he may have the money, but when it comes down to bare steel and guts, can we depend on him? Analyst fumed inwardly at being discussed as though he were a piece of furniture. But he recognized the situation. The half-elf wanted to be assured that someone could vouch for him. Jakath spoke quietly. He and I took a trip to Yathhauer and had a run-in with bandits. He isn't very experienced, but he can use that sword he carries. Lofto Kissin frowned. All right then. I wanted to ask because you know how it can be in the wild. I do indeed. But you don't think I'd take somebody I didn't trust no matter how much money he had. Humph. You'd figure a way to get it off of him. Somewhere short there of theft before you'd gone out 2 days. Analyst wondered about that. He'd had the feeling that Jakath was no more honest than he had to be. But this was the first time he'd heard anyone come out right out and say it. It bothered him a little. He'd grown up enough to have put aside the notion of all venturers as a band of brothers. But cheating your comrades? That was bad. Keep it up, half-elf, said Jakath. You'll have him off looking for someone else to go out with. Humph. But the half-elf went quiet. The silence lasted for quite some time. Then Jakath said, Well, are you in? And if you are in, what do you have to contribute? Lofto Kissin looked up, smiling. Ah, so you want me for more than my good looks, eh? Or more than my good looks then? Yes, I'm in. I haven't got a lot, but I can put in a little over 10 ponies if necessary. Jakath nodded. As much as you can. We've got to get ourselves a warrant, as well as buying supplies, enough to take us as far as Shandakar. Only as far as Shandakar? What do we do if treasure isn't there? Jakath sighed. You're no beginner, Lofto Kissin. You know how things go as well as anyone. Can you imagine the trouble we'd have getting together the money to put to supplies there and back? If we don't get anything out of this trip, then maybe we can hire out as caravan guards or something. Now listen to what other rumors are out. The half elf grinned. Fine, fine. But there's one little thing you haven't given much thought to. The treasure is cursed. That's a big risk, Jakath. Pardon me. Jakath shook his head. You heard the story. It doesn't sound to me like so much as like a curse, like as like a whole lot of bad luck. So much so that the one fellow left convinced himself that it was a curse. Even if it is, well, we have our fine Rash the Night Wizard along with us, and he can probably remove the curse. What do you say, Nalis Tador? Alice Hatter scowled thoughtfully. It depends entirely on the nature of the curse. Some you can practically remove by washing them. Some take more effort, and some indeed are beyond anyone's power to remove, and have to wear away. At the very least, I'd probably be able to tell if it was cursed, and very likely likely remove any but the strongest curses. On the other hand, I tend to agree with Jakath. The curse seems more like bad luck. Chapter 8. Jakath. Jakath wasn't sure whether to be pleased with Annalise or not. When they began talking about divisions of the treasure, Annalise insisted on a larger share since he was investing the larger amount. On the one hand, this made him seem much less the green boy out on the road for the first time. On the other hand, a youngster out on his first venture was usually lucky to get a share at all, and had to be content with some fixed portion. But everyone else saw the point that there wouldn't be a venture if they hadn't found someone with a significant amount of money for supplies. And it was right, the person who invested the most ought to get the most. Lafto Kissen's comment still rankled. Jakath had learned early on that nothing was harder to get rid of than a bad name, so he was careful just who he tried to put anything over on and when. And that someone would think him capable of cheating a comrade on the trail, that was bothersome. He'd been careful not to try to reassure the boy too much, which would only make him suspicious. But he could see he was going to have to be extra careful with Annalise around, at least for the first while. There were a few methods they could use for cutting the cost of their supplies, but if Annalise caught him at any of those, he might just remember the half-elf's comment and start worrying. Trent and Viren knew that the risks you took out on the trail were bad enough, without mistrust among the party. Partly, to allay any suspicion the boy might have, Jakath had taken him along on the first trip to pick up some of the supplies. The easiest way would be to let one person handle all the money, but he could just see the look on Annalise. He could just see the look Annalise would give if he were suddenly asked to trust Jakath with his silver. As they went through the marketplace, he asked, "You don't have any armor, do you?" "No." "If we can manage it, we better try to get you something. Even boiled leather is better than nothing." "We're still a little short, aren't we?" He felt himself frowning. "Well, we can do it if we're careful, and we don't let anyone put anything over on us. But I don't think I've ever gone on out to supply a venture where I thought I had more money than I needed." He was pleased to see the boy smile slightly at that. "Look," he said, "I suppose you know a little bit about bargaining in the marketplace and all, but I've been doing this for a long time. Why don't you let me handle the bargaining, and I'll tell you how I do things and the why when we're done." Picking up the general supplies was a fairly easy matter, and Jakath was tolerably pleased with how well they'd done, even without being able to use some of the tricks he knew. He'd even managed to pick up a used coat of leather armor for a bargain price, along with a leather helmet. While they were finishing up their dealings with the armorer, Annalise tugged on Jakath's sleeve. "Look," he muttered, "there's a set of throwing knives. Do you think we could afford them?" Jakath wasn't sure how to feel about that either. If the boy was going to take him as a great model and example, he could end up tripping over Annalise every time he turned around. And it could add one more stress to a band, which might make it come apart at the wrong time. On the other hand, it always gave you a good feeling when some youngster looked up to you, no matter how slightly. You can't throw a knife, can you? Amos's eyes flashed. No, I don't suppose you were born able to throw a knife either, so I'll have to practice. Not the exact response a boy would make to his hero, Jakath nodded. Let's see what they cost. He bargained fiercely, noting every smallest fault and defect in the pair of knives, and finally managed to arrive at a price even he thought might be a little low. The the shopkeeper was insisting, in the usual fashion, that if he continued to give away his merchandise, his family would all be out on the streets begging. He gave the knives to Amos. Here, once we're out on the trail, I'll start giving you lessons in how to use them. Thanks. They met with the others, discussed what they had purchased and how much it cost. So far, the cost had been marginally lower than it had been expected. Jakath called the innkeeper over. He was a tall man who had once been a warrior, from the look of his battered, scarred face, though he was a little overweight. Landlord, do you have a place where we could store our goods for a little? Store our goods for a little while? This is rough, super rough. He frowned. Well, I do have a storeroom free for a little while. How long were you planning on storing your goods there? A day and a half, perhaps two? Well, I'll tell you what. You give me one gold piece and it's yours. Jakath grinned. You must have misheard. I want to rent the space for 2 days, not buy your inn outright. 5 coppers. Can I afford to give things away? One silver piece is as low as I dare go. Nonsense. Come on, lads. Let's start picking up our stuff. We'll have to go somewhere where the landlord doesn't think we're fools. The landlord didn't look at all surprised. Go if you wish. Perhaps I can make the price as low as 9 coppers. If you make it 7, it's still too high, but we'll pay it just for the convenience of not having to haul our stuff around. The landlord spread his hands and shrugged. 7 coppers it is. But you're getting the better of me. This generosity of mine is going to end me up starving in a gutter somewhere. They stored their goods, paid out 7 coppers, and went on their way to the palace. The sentry at the gate looked them over suspiciously. Then Jakath handed him 5 coppers and said, We're here to arrange for a warrant. With no change in his expression, the sentry said, Go to the doorway and pull the bell rope. You'll have to leave your weapons at the door. They moved on, and the sentry kept watch from his post, where they stacked their arms by the door. Orphaz snorted and muttered, Yes, keep watch. Think of the horror of 5 desperate characters running wild with swords through the palace. Jakath grinned. Gently, gently, my good Chandakranian friend. This is one of the petty things we have to go through from time to time, and you know it. Let them enjoy lording it over us for a time. In a few days, we'll be out on the road, and they'll still be here standing in front of the gate, collecting a few coppers from anybody who comes in, and dreaming of making themselves wealthy. And of course, he has to share his take with his fellows and his watch commander, so 5 coppers doesn't go very far. We, on the other hand, make a few payoffs to get what we need out of the palace, then we're away. And whatever we pick up on the venture is our own. The doorkeeper, who answered the bell, looked at them down his nose, clearly well aware of how superior he was to this crew. Jakath, comparing his attitude with that of the guard, preferred the guard. He was a soldier and could quite likely give a good account of himself if it came to fighting. The doorkeeper was running to The doorkeeper was running to fat, and from the look of him, had never seen steel drawn in anger. We have come to arrange a warrant. Have you indeed? Now, the Lord Chamberlain, who arranges such matters, has a very busy schedule. Is there some reason why I should consider adding your names to this list of appointments? There have been times when bribes would have been a little less obvious, supposedly dropped purses and the like, but the doorkeeper had his hand out expectantly, so Jacath dropped 5 coppers into it. The doorkeeper frowned. The Lord Chamberlain is very busy. Jacath kept his expression blank as he dropped 5 more coppers into the man's hand. If you will follow me, I will see if the Lord Chamberlain can see you. They walked along behind the doorkeeper, through several corridors, finally arriving at a large brass door. Wait here while I inform the Lord Chamberlain of your presence. He opened the brass door and stepped through, closing it behind him. From the look of things, Jacob could tell that the Lord Chamberlain wouldn't expect too large a bribe. He was on the main floor, and his office was very simple compared to some. He would be looking to better himself, but just as 5 coppers was a lot to a guardsman, so a few silver pieces would be a great deal to a man in this situation. They were running a little short of silver, but with a little luck, they would have enough to get them out on the trail. On the trail, they would hunt a bit for the pot, which would ease their minds a bit. We'd better see to it they didn't expect too much anywhere just yet. It was a long way to Shandakar. When the doorkeeper finally brought them in the presence of his chamberlain, Chekov predicted that things would go reasonably well here. He knew just how to act, and so did the others, except maybe Annalise. And Annalise had been doing a good job of keeping his mouth shut. The chamberlain was a spare man of medium height, red tunic and green hose, with a rather decorative short sword on his hip. His hair was worn long and gray, and the hairline receding. His lined face held the expression of one who had not enjoyed life particularly, and sees no reason why anyone else should enjoy their life either. So you wish to have a king's warrant? Yes, sir. Hm. You may or may not know that many scoundrels have been accepting king's warrants, then using them as an excuse for various illegal behaviors. What sort of assurance can you give us that you will not do the same? I understand completely, sir, but these scoundrels you speak of, they are men of few means, who will then seek to enrich themselves no matter how. But if you examine the contents of this purse, you will see that we are not that sort. The chamberlain looked in the purse, then set it down on the table in front of him. Yes, quite so. He called a name, and a door of the inner office opened, admitting a plainly dressed man carrying a pen case. Without glancing at him, the chamberlain said, "A warrant for venturers." "Yes, Excellency." The scribe picked up a sheet of vellum from a stack on the table, dipped a pen into an inkwell, and began to write. "Who is the leader?" "I am. My name is Jacath." The rest of the procedure was quite swift. There seemed to be no need to have the names of the others of the band, and since the warrant was already filled out, all that was needed was the name in the appropriate place, and then the chamberlain's seal. Shortly after, they were on their way to the palace gate, now ready to proceed to their adventure. On their venture. Perhaps it was mere imagination, but it seemed to Jacath that the weather had turned wet the moment they marched out of the city gate. For the first 3 days it rained, alternating periods of heavy, drenching rain with periods of mere drizzle, with a few periods of overcast dampness. There were enough horses, mules, and wagons on the road to have turned it into a quagmire. In most places, they could find reasonably firm footing on the grassy verge of the road, but there were a few times when there was nothing to be done but to go through patches of thick mud, trying not to lose a boot or sink too deeply. There were no complaints, no arguments after the first day. In fact, after the first day, no one said anything more than was absolutely necessary, perhaps out of some common understanding that too many words could lead to an argument, which no one wanted. Jacath worried a little about Annalise, not so much for the boy himself, but for what might happen to the whole venture if Annalise was to cause dissension among the group by either complaining or quarreling brought on by discomfort. But apparently there was little to worry about. Annalise walked on, face a little set and frowning, but he never voiced a complaint. Even when someone jokingly wondered if all this was a sign the country was going to float away, the most he would do would flash a small smile. By the end of the third day, the rain had cleared off, and they had reached the little town of Asan. The hills were beyond them now, and before them stretched a flat plain. Jacath looked around it at his little band. I'd suggest that we stop for a little ale, perhaps a meal that wasn't half cooked over a drowning fire. We won't be doing this every day, even at every town, but I think we deserve a little something to make up for what we've come through. Orphaz, Nalistador, Lafado Kasan, and Lafado Kasan grinned openly, and Endless smiled a little more weakly. The town did not boast an inn, along with a portly, balding land. Sorry. The town did boast an inn, along with a portly, balding landlord who almost seemed to work at being everyone's idea of a jolly innkeeper. Jacath managed to arrange a fair price for a meal for the party, including the first mug of ale. But jolly innkeeper or not, the host was most insistent that his good heart and generosity toward the travelers should not make a pauper of him. They seated themselves, and the king's innkeeper's helper brought out bowls, spoons, and mugs, and then began to dish out helpings of stew from the pot over the fire. As he worked, he told them about the happenings in the neighborhood. Old widow Nahalis's pig and the piglets the other day, and what of that, you might say? But there were 5 piglets, 3 pink like the mother, 1 black like the boar that sired them, but the 5th, oh, the 5th, there's a marvel and a portent for you. The 5th had red and white stripes, the like of which had never been seen on any pig ever known. He went on with the strange things that had happened to various people in the village, strange sights in the night sky, strange cloud formations going over the town, and ended up with, now see that gentleman across the room? The one all in gray with the beak of the nose on him? That is the rain caller the council have hired. For all we know, that there has been rain on the south of us that has not come this far, and it is concern for the crops and the farms. It is said he has a good reputation, so the council has agreed to pay him a nice sum to call the rain for us. What do you think of that, sirs? There was more. That was the way of his talk. Many questions, without allowing those he spoke to a moment to answer. Even as he spoke the last words, he was on bustling off across the room at a signal from the rain caller, then hastening on to some other errand. Excuse me. They had their meal, along with an extra mug of ale, which Jacath allowed, hoping that they wouldn't find themselves somewhere up the trail in a few weeks, wishing they hadn't spent it. But he convinced himself that they could never get so bad off that he couldn't find something to make them a bit of money, even if it was only guarding a caravan. And they really needed something to take their minds off what the weather had been like for the past few days. The trouble started before he could head it off. Analysts, apparently not used to the strong sort of beer served here, had been muttering to himself and to Orvaz and Nalus Tedor, who were seated on either side of him. They'd been paying little attention to him, but suddenly he was on his feet. Rain collar, he said. The old man turned to look at him. Did you call the stuff we walked through the past 3 days? The old man continued to look at him. Probably not, he answered. Jacath is up and moving by now, but Analyst was continuing to speak, swaying a little on his feet. Probably not indeed. What's your technique? Look over your shoulder and see if there's a rain cloud coming up, then cast your spell. And if there's no rain cloud in sight, well, it's not proper season for making rain here. By this time, Jacath had a grip on Analyst's shoulders and a hand slipped over his mouth. He looked at the old rain collar. Your pardon, sir. He's had a bit more to drink than he ought, perhaps. When he's sober, I'll teach him a little about manners. The rain collar shook his head. He's done me no lasting injury, so I have no quarrel with him. But I will say this: he'll not find what he seeks until he knows what he wants. With that, the old man turned on his heel and left the inn. Cass stared after him, wondering if this was some sort of curse. If maybe he ought to run after the man and try to make some amends. About that time, Annals twisted out of his grip and stepped backward, stared at him fiercely. The fierce look suddenly went vague. The boy fell backward, rapping his head against the edge of a table on the way down. Tran and Viren, Jakath muttered. He looked at Orphaz. You're about the huskiest. Give me a hand to get him out to a bed. Orphaz grinned. If we don't find any excitement, we can always make our own, eh? Chapter 9. Analysts. Tran and Viren. Analyst rubbed the back of his head. The beer had been too strong. He had a vague memory of making a fool of himself, but he wasn't sure what had happened. He did know that he must have been hit with something, because there was a lump near as big as his fist back there. Oh, well, said a voice, which he was able to identify as belonging to Lafto Kisson. It'll take your mind off how badly the rest of your head hurts. Anna struggled to hold his eyes open against the brightness. The half-elf was sitting cross-legged, looking at him with an expression just short of smirk. Analyst's first reaction was to think of it that if it changed him into a smirk, he'd get up and pound him halfway into the ground. His second reaction, coming from various feelings in his head and stomach, was that even if the other laughed outright, he, Analyst, would probably be lucky if he could go as far as to stick out his tongue in reply. He pulled himself to a sitting position. He wanted to ask what had happened, but was a little afraid to admit he didn't remember. And besides, the feeling of disapproval he was sensing from all his companions made him doubt that he really wanted to know what had happened. Nicely done altogether, Analyst. If you told me you weren't used to drinking beer, I'd made sure to order milk for you. There was scorn in his voice. As it is, we'll have to decide if we want to continue on any further with one of our number under a curse. A curse? That brought something into his memory. But what was it? The pounding in his head, both from the drinking and whatever made that lump, made it hard to think. I don't believe it was really a curse, Jacob. I've told you that. Nahus Tedor spoke up. Yes, so you've said. All the fellow said was, he'll not find what he seeks until he knows what he wants. And you say that if it's a curse, it's so mild a curse that you can't detect it. But I'm wondering if we want to be saddled with even a mild curse. Or maybe some sort of spell to make him know what he wants? All I know is it had all night sorry, all I know is it had all the right wording and phraseology to be a curse, and it worries me. Even if it were a curse, what do you propose, Jakath? It seems that our only two choices are to go on as we have been and hope nothing untoward happens, or to kill him here and now. And if we don't kill him, he can always follow us, so it would be hard to be rid of him. I, for the one, will. I, for one, will have nothing to do with murder. There were murmurings of assent from the others, though in the case of Orphaz, the assent seemed to be less than wholehearted. Through still bleary eyes, Annalise saw Jakath look around, then nod. If that's the way of it, we continue. But if our luck goes from bad here, well, we may want to reconsider. And Annalise, I'm going to have a few words with you about some of the things that one does and does not do out on a venture. By now, Annalise's mind had sorted out the hazy memories of the night before, of being downright rude to the old rain caller, but he couldn't quite remember what the rain caller's response had been. Of course, by now he knew anyway, through what Jakath had said, and he certainly hoped it wasn't a curse. Jakath scolded him unmercifully for some minutes, while Annalise tried hard to pay attention enough to say yes or no at the right time. In actual fact, very little Jakath's diatribe stayed with him, save for a general sense that he ought to be more careful with who he said what to, because he might not always have friends who could pull him out of the fire. They moved out very shortly, and the packing up permitted Annalise another excuse to pay slight attention to Jakath's reprimand. By the time they had gotten themselves well out on the way, the headache was receding, though the pain was where something in his head continued. Eventually, by the things that his comrades had said about the previous night, he figured out that he had collapsed shortly after the encounter with the rain caller and had banged his head on the table. Just to maintain his own self-esteem, he never let on that there was a part of the night he didn't remember. Though again, he was not too sure how successful he was in misleading his colleagues. On they went, with nothing untoward happening, and their only encounters on the road were with farmers hauling produce, and once a merchant's carriage. The caravan guards were a hard-looking, weathered crew, who gave the party suspicious glances all the while they went past. Jakath slipped up to Annalise's side and warned him, "Be careful with this lot. They're not all at all trusting. If they think your hand is getting too close to a weapon, they're likely to cut you down first." Annalise nodded, and unobtrusively made sure his hands were hanging empty and wide and open by his sides. The next day, they came to the town of Rothahan, where the villagers were holding their annual festival. There were games, races, wrestling, archery contests, and the like, and Lafdo Kissin suggested to Jakath, "Suppose I enter the archery? We could always use a little money." Jakath shrugged. "You could try, I suppose. But haven't they heard of you in all the towns and villages? I'd heard that you were banned from archery competitions because they thought your elven heritage gave you an unfair advantage." The half elf grinned. "I've won every shooting contest I've entered since I was able to pull a bow, and some people don't like losing, particularly to elves or half elves. But it's possible they haven't heard of me in Rothahan. And if they turn me down, well, I've been turned down before." Jakath considered for a moment, then nodded. "Go ahead. I think someone would better stay with Annalise, so I'll do that." "Just a minute!" Annalise was furious. "You think I'm some kind of child that I have to be taken care of and watched every moment to be sure I don't disgrace my elders? I can watch out for myself, you know. Jakath's mouth set in a tight line. At these village festivals, they have every thief, pickpocket, and swindler coming up the road to ply their trade. And I know you've lived in the city, protecting yourself against the likes of them for years. But I also know that the village authorities can be very sticky about foreigners disrupting their fare, even over a matter as a stolen purse. So I'd like to make the risk as small as I can. And if you can remember, I'm the one who's had the experience in these things. Alice forced himself to settle down. He still didn't like the notion, but Jakath was more experienced than he. He went to the booth where the entries were being taken for the archery contest, and they took Lafto Kissen's name along with the entrance via five copper coins. The party set out to look the fair over. Fairly shortly, however, they were approached by a short man with a pink crown wearing a ruff of white hair. Behind him were three other younger men, all carrying staves and looking serious. The short man spoke. You are the half known as Lafto Kissen? I am. I am the mayor of this town and master of the festival. You understand, this festival is for the enjoyment of our local people, and our prizes are small. Your reputation has preceded you, sir, and your skill with the bow is well known. That being so, it would rather take away the enjoyment of the festival if we were to allow someone such as yourself to compete with our local lads. That being so, I wish to refund your entry fee with an additional 5 coppers for the inconvenience, and hope that you will not take this amiss. The half elf looked them over for a moment, just long enough to let them feel uncomfortable, then smiled. I understand, he said, but you do not mind if my friends and I enjoy the rest of the festival. The mayor relaxed visibly. Oh, by all means, stay and enjoy yourselves, and I thank you for being so understanding. He passed over a small pouch, bowed and turned, and left, or bowed, turned, and left, maintaining his dignity as best he could. The three with the staves frowned at the party, then followed the mayor. Lafto Kissen was still smiling slightly lightly as he looked around at his companions. What do you think of this? I've gained 5 coppers without shooting a single arrow, and I think I might be able to do even better. Jakath shot a slightly suspicious look. How? The half elf wore a mocking smile. Suppose we go watch the archery. I'd guess there'd be one or two of the locals might be willing to pit their shooting against the famous Lafto Kissen, particularly if that same Kissen seemed to be having a bad day. Jakath frowned. For certain you could, but remember that these things are like. If someone decides you've been taking advantage of their gullible local lads, we may not get out of here alive. Lafto Kissen was almost smirking now. If I were too greedy, for certain, we might be in some danger. But if all I do is earn a few more extra coins without making too much of a fool of anybody, then who's going to cry because he's made a bad bet? All right, then, I still don't like it, but be careful. They made their way to the archery butts and watched as the shooting commenced. The first eliminations were very easy. Men who entered for more of the fun of it than any great faith in their skill. Most laughed over it, though one or two claimed that a speck had gotten in their eye at a crucial time, or a sudden gust had taken their shafts slightly awry, or the like. Even those who made their excuses took their losses in good part. The contest would soon work its way down to 5 men whose arrows had been going consistently into the bullseye. One was an older man, balding somewhat, though what hair he still possessed was mostly red. He always had a grim expression, even when he was shooting at his best. The second was also an older man, dark haired, Though he wore a jacket and a hood of dark brown, he had an amulet on some kind around his neck, which he would touch with his fingers of his right hand just before he began shooting. As with the others, he had been putting his arrows all in the bull's eye, though, unlike the others, he had been consistently grouping them in a space that could be covered by a man's hand. The third was an old man again, wizened and wrinkled like an old tree root, with no hair at all on his head or face, save for bushy white eyebrows. The remaining two were younger men, one near as slender as the bow he drew, who would draw, aim carefully and loose, in very deliberate motions. The last one was a husky lad wearing a green tunic and wearing a girl's hair ribbon around his upper arm. He made a show of doing the whole thing casually, drawing, hardly seeming to pause for aim at all, and loosing. But his arrows always went straight into the bull's eye, with a respectable grouping as well. The judges were now measuring the groupings, eliminating the loosest each time. The first to go was the slender young man, who put 4 arrows in the area the size of the palm of the judge's hand, but the fifth about a finger's breadth away. Then the old wizened man went down in the next round, followed by the red-haired man. The man with the amulet and the young man with the girl's ribbon continued to shoot. By this time they were becoming weary, and the one was touching his amulet before every shot. The young man, on the other hand, was no longer casual about his shooting, taking a little more care with his aim each time. Twice they shot, and each time the arrows were so close that there was no difference between the two. On the third try, the man with the amulet seemed to have a slight catch in his draw, which sent one of his arrows a little out of the group. The younger man, triumph already on his face, shot his usual close group, to the cheers who bet on him, and groans to those who bet the other way. He swaggered over to collect his prize. In the meantime, Lofto Kissin unslung and strung his bow. He then selected 5 arrows from his quiver, running his fingers over them. Then sighting along the shafts. The 5 chosen arrows he stabbed into the turf in front of him. Then he began to shoot. The first 5 he grouped so close together that some of the heads scraped each other, hitting the target. He collected his arrows and shot again. The third arrow strayed a little outside the group, and he shook his head, clucking his tongue, put the last 2 into a palm-sized group. By now, several people were watching him, and he got a young boy of about 8 years to run down and fetch his arrows, then started again. Twice more he put all the arrows within the palm-sized area. Then, the next time, his 4th arrow slipped. By this time, quite a few people were watching him, including the young contest winner. He got his arrows back and was replacing them in the quiver when the young man approached him. "Why weren't you in the contest?" The half-elf smiled a cheerful smile. They thought I'd have an unfair advantage, being part elf as I am. And for sure, it would be bad thing to spoil the sporting event by having it won by someone who has an advantage. Most unfair it would be. Then you fancy yourself a bowman? I've bent a bow from time to time. What would you say to a little contest? But you've already heard they don't want me in contests. To the depths with that they want or don't want. I'm talking about a private contest. You and me. Just to see who's best. Well, we could do that, I suppose, but what's a contest without a prize? Suppose we put up a couple of silver pieces to make it interesting. It was only moments until they were lined up in front of the butts, ready to shoot. The agreement was that they would each shoot 3 groups of 5, and the one with the best score overall would be the winner. Each of them put the first 5 arrows into a group easily covered by the palm of the hand. For the next, the young local put his arrows into a similar small group, while Lofto Kissen's arrows were so close together as to be scraping one another. On the third try, the young man did even better than he did the first 2 times, putting his arrows into an area no bigger than 3 finger breadths, while Lafo Kissen did as well, or as perhaps a little better. There was no question that the half or elf, oh boy, there was no question that the half elf had won the contest. The young man paid out his wager, then said, "Another contest. I could do better than that, given a chance." Analyst watched with interest. Even with his little experience, he could see possibilities here. Lafto Kissen could help keep the young man shooting until he'd used up all his money. But at the same time, he'd be pushing toward the time when someone decided that he was taking unfair advantage, as Jakath had warned. But the half-elf smiled broadly. "Perhaps another time. But I have an advantage, you see. You've been shooting all morning and are at least a little tired, while I'm comparatively fresh. But come, let's go over to the refreshment booth and I'll buy you a mug of ale. By Tren and Buren, it's good to find someone who can give a little bit of competition." Jakath was smiling as he turned to Analyst. "Now there's a lesson for you." He could have kept him shooting until he'd won not only his prize money for this morning, but every penny he could scrape together and borrow from his friends. But he was content with a couple of silvers, then went off with him, telling him how great a shot he was. "I hope you caught on." Analyst nodded. "And the couple of silver pieces he won will give us a little cushion, if we should need it." "Right. But we don't go spending money carelessly with that in mind. It's to be kept in matters of real urgency." Analyst grimaced. "I know. I've lived my whole life treating my wages that way. Old Lanathan was never the most generous of employers, but if you were careful, you could get by and occasionally save up some to waste something on something." They wandered through the crowds in the wake of Lafto Kissen and his erstwhile competitor. Alice wondered just what he was planning to do. He knew that his first intention was to pay back Lannison's 40 silver ponies. But was that all in hopes of getting his old job back? If they found any treasure worth having, there'd probably be more than 40 silver ponies in it. And would he want the job? He smiled a little at himself then. Was that how it had been with his father? The lure of some treasure had seemed to promise what had been denied him all these years? And the lure was so strong that it blinded him to all else? It blinded him to all else? Oh my gosh, okay. For his own part, there was little choice, other than staying with Lanathan in a very subordinate position until somehow, somewhere, he could make Lanathan forget about the 40 silver ponies and earn his old status back. But there's no saying when, if ever that might be. And if he died out on the trail somewhere, well, he would have died trying. As for buying his job back, well, he'd see when the time comes what he would do. They continued to march the next day, going out of the town on the road to the northwest. There was a march through wild country, almost uninhabited, for about 3 days until they came to the town of Sandaris, where they could hit the road that went east and west. On the second day, they saw a small party of goblins watching them from a hilltop, some way off the road. It was Lofto Kissen who pointed them out, jerking his head in their direction and saying, "Look, goblins over there." Jakath looked without pausing, and Analyst looked up as well. On a hill watching them were 5 figures, clothed in mostly chainmail and fur, decorated with tied feathers with dyed feathers and bright ribbons or bits of shiny glass or metal. They were all husky, with arms seeming a bit long for their bodies. 5 of them, said Jacath. Or do you think there's more? The half elf shook his head. 5 is all I've seen, but that doesn't necessarily mean much. Right. Well, everyone keep your eyes open. Knowing goblins, they won't attack an armed party unless they have an advantage in numbers. But on the other hand, they might try something at night too. I'd heard numbers of goblins were dwindling. The numbers of goblins are dwindling lately, said Orphaz. Jacath snorted. One year the goblin numbers are increasing, the next year they're dwindling, and nobody can seem to explain why. Now, Tador, do you have any ideas on the subject? The wizard shook his head. I haven't made a particular study of goblins, so all I can tell you is that the kinds of things I've heard from time to time. That is just what you said. The goblins seem to increase and decrease without any easy explanation. And all I can say is we'd better be wary for the next few nights. Even if they don't outnumber us right now. They may go find some friends, or they may try to catch us by surprise. Dun dun dun. So that was the next 3 chapters. Thank you so much for tuning in. So we've done 3 groups of 3, and tomorrow we'll be wrapping up the last bit of the story. Only if it's not gonna I'm just gonna warn everybody here right now, because I had to deal with it myself, is that it's not finished. So it's gonna leave off. I'm going to have to eventually work on finishing it. But I do have other projects I have to get done before I work on this project. So, but I wanted to share it with you, like I said, because I like what's here so far. It's fun. It's and because it spins off of the other one. And if you were to take a look at the map, which I will, I promise, once it's ready, I will release it. It's just not the second. um, but yeah, so this is the second part of the story, and I'm really liking it so far. It does hurt my heart that it's not finished, but I think I know where it's going, and I think if I think I can. But work on it really hard, I can probably get it done. Just down the line, not right away. So, without further ado, I'm going to say goodnight to you all. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching me. And I will talk to you all again tomorrow night. So, thank you.